Hey everybody, we're back here at Friday PM. I'm here with Reggie Groff, filmmaker extraordinaire. Reggie's from Portland originally. We've talked before a couple years ago, but we're catching up again to see what he's up to these days. So how you doing, Reggie?
Great.
Good to
How are
see you.
you?
Not bad, not bad. So you grew up in Portland. You're a Portland native,
Right. Right.
Munjoy Hill.
Munjo Hill, born and bred, born and well bred.
Yeah, exactly,
Overly
exactly.
bred. Actually, I had the Nissan's bakery next to my house, so you get that B&M beans, and of course you have SD Warren, which isn't quite so pretty, but all of those odors coming through and wonderful scents to wake up in the morning with is kind of fun.
So we had interviewed a couple years ago Crockett. He had kind of a book about his life growing up on Munjoy Hill.
Yeah.
What, you were growing up in the 70s or?
Yeah, basically, born in '64, grew up in the Hill, lived there really for 40 years. So, child of the '70s and '80s, really. But it was fun. I mean, look, the Hill was an actual neighborhood. Now it's really just a place. Quite a difference, because you'd have hundreds of kids on the Hill. Parents knew each other because they'd have to watch out for their kids, and so it's a completely different world. Now people pull into their condos, the doors go up, and nobody knows who anybody is. So that's what makes it a place. Before, when you have just loads of kids everywhere, plenty of street fights, plenty of street games, a lot of chasing, everything you could think of that happens, the benefits of growing up as a sort of free range child. Literally the lights would come on, kids would come home, or the whistle used to blow at the fire station. So, all those classic things that you hear about, that was definitely the Hill. One of the great places that everybody went in the summertime was the big swimming pool down at the bottom of Cutter Street on the other side of Munjo Hill, and that was spectacular. But it was definitely terrific. And you have to watch out for what street you get down to. It's like, all right, I've been in a fight in that street. I guess to avoid that one, I go to this one. You just go out and do the thing. Of course, as my dad had a karate school and I was a pudgy kid, it's like I had a bullseye on my back, because it was like, I take him, beat the guy's, karate school kid up. But I learned to defend myself pretty good. I never really get any bad fights. It was always just like, little
Well,
little battles.
scraps. We'll talk.
Scraps.
I mean, was that the idea that was different there? Because I know there's that schoolhouse that has become condos or something like that. Was that a school there? Was that taking the
Well,
place of some of the?
so my class was the last year of the baby boomers. Baby boomers. Every single school we went to, they closed as we left. So Shaler School, I went there from first to fourth grade. They closed it. Went to Emerson School, Emerson Street, which is, I think we went sixth and seventh. They closed it. Went to Jack Junior High School. They basically converted that to an elementary school as we left. Adams School was for kindergarten. That is no, that they destroyed that. They actually tore it down eventually. And then Portland High School, the year that we left, they voted to determine whether they're going to turn that to an office building or to put money into it. That's the only school to survive my class. They actually decided to keep it open. So we were just a wrecking ball. And so I had so really in terms of going to school, I just walked, literally just a couple blocks to every school.
Move from place to place.
Place to place. The very bottom of the hill was North School, but which I didn't go to. But again, our class, my particular grade of kids left that class, they closed that as well. So of course they've all turned into, basically elderly, or not even
Some
elderly,
types of
just some
housing.
type of housing for people, which is great because it's a huge vacuous space in those buildings.
Which is interesting because I went to Waynfleet where they kind of did the opposite, where they were all housing that became then and turned into a smaller school.
Right.
But was that you'd still then all kind of be at Portland High at the later age, or was that all the
Yeah.
way through to high school?
Well, all of these elementary and junior high school students would end up at either Portland
They'd
or
all
Deering.
kind of move into that Portland High
Right.
Deering thing.
Yeah, the thing about Portland back in the day was that it was very rough and tumble. It was very, unfinished. You could get into the cemetery. All of the bars are broken in terms of the metal posts, and whether you're down on the waterfront and things are a little sketchy and rough. I mean, it basically was a great opportunity to just explore and have some fun. Now things are so buttoned up. You really, it would be probably, I don't know if you get arrested these days, but you definitely have a harder time kind of doing it. And of course, it's hard to do that as a 59-year-old guy, but I still want to, get in and
Explore. Well, in Portland, I mean, I feel like in those days it was more of that port town where that's like the idea of the rough and tumble sailors
Yeah,
and all of
exactly,
that and the
exactly.
grittiness and it did get swept away with kind of the just general gentrification of the whole city in
All
a
right,
lot of
all right.
ways. And that, I mean, it got so swept up. And then the past couple of years with COVID and the pandemic happening, people got even more so wanted to leave the cities, coming here because it
Right.
was that perfect balance. And then it became such a bubble.
Right.
But when you were growing up here, I know you by looking around, you had a love of movies at an early age. Like what was your first experiences with television and movies that kind of turned you on to all of that?
Well, my dad was a huge movie guy, and he was although he left school probably at probably I don't know 10th grade or something like that. He was an avid reader, wrote scripts nonstop, went to New York to audition, was in a few off Broadway plays. It was just his life. Did a lot of local theater, but he collected movies but at the same time he had a karate school that he got into, and he ended up having hundreds and hundreds of students through the years, if not thousands. But one of his students worked for the Channel 8 News, Channel 8 TV station, ABC TV affiliate, and they had this vast library of 16 millimeter films that really the license had run out. And so the films were just sitting there. And so every week my dad would go up and borrow probably 5 or 10 different movie prints. And eventually they were just going to get rid of them. We ended up with probably 80 different movies.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And this is in the 70s before tapes came out.
Right.
So we had just a tremendous library of films. And so we would always be running some film, and I'd be bringing films to school all the time because it might be like we'd have a print with Charles Lawton Rembrandt, or we'd have She Wore Yellow Ribbon with John Wayne, Back to Bataan, Prince Valiant, Thief of Baghdad, da 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 da, Son of King Kong, Frankenstein Meets a Wolfman. So it was like so the schools would love to just show the kids movies to fill some time, or there might be something related, or I'd have friends over. But that's how I really watched television, was on a 8-foot movie screen. And then the other great thing is even Star Trek or Hogan's Heroes, we just borrow prints and bring them back all the time. So to watch Star Trek for the first time on an 8-foot screen in full beautiful color was like crazy.
That is cool.
But it wasn't about money. It was just the opportunity. It was just a friendship that allowed us to have this incredible, opportunity to watch stuff. So as a kid, I would, not only I'd be the ultimate projector geek, because not only would I be fixing projectors, I'd be bringing the films and trying to just enjoy what it was. I mean, I began shooting Super 8 movie films and shooting 16 millimeter films, but I also had a feel for it because I've been, using films all my life. You just it's in literally it's in my blood. I'm sure it's probably going to kill me at some point. That chemicals are from that stuff. But it was just fun to kind of have that. And so the monster stuff around me is just kind of part of that enjoyment of all of those Universal monster movies that are campy and fun and well shot and just beautiful. And the soundtrack. In fact, again, back to my dad, he would before the VCRs come out, he would record with reel-to-reel audio tape any movie that he loved and the soundtracks to films. So there's always that, you hear playing these reel-to-reel tapes, people shushing one another because be quiet, we're taping, something off the TV or off some record or something. So the soundtrack of movies was always playing in the house, if not the records themselves. But it was just, that the temperature of growing up on the hill was a lot about movie making and having a lot of kids over to watch movies, and it was kind of intermingled with all things. But one thing to keep in mind,
Yeah.
it was just really hard to when the films were put on television, they were put through such a low resolution
Right.
camera.
Right. Yeah.
And then it would often burn, like you'd see these burn marks in the actual video camera because there were tubes. So you could be watching a movie on television, old black and white movie. By the time you looked at a TV set, it looked so bad
Wasn't the
that
same.
people could not understand why anybody would want to watch an old black and white movie, because when they looked at it on the television set, it was this soft, bizarre bunch of shapes. And in fact, eventually a lot of these color prints began to shift into turning more magenta as the color sort of disappeared off the film. And so a lot of the old films, color in black and white, just looked terrible. And it wasn't until Turner finally retransferred the old films to digital, that people began to realize that, wow, some movies are fantastic.
Right, right.
But for the longest time, 20 years, 30 years, old movies looked horrendous on television.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could see, literally side by side. I'd be watching a movie here in my living room and then looking on television. It just looked just terrible. And it was just the technology was so poor that a lot of people could never get over that hurdle of being able to look at an old movie and really appreciate it for what the movie was, as opposed to how bad it looked when they were trying to watch it. So that's one of those things that was a sort of set in its own time that a lot of people don't really quite appreciate how much of that technical hurdle there was to enjoy the movie.
Well, because I know that a lot of folks that are filmmakers now and from all of our generation, they really rediscovered movies through cable and just like late night movies. Because back in the day, before there was video stores everywhere and things like that, that was the only way to watch them.
Right.
But you had an extra advantage in the sense that you were seeing them really in the best way possible. So like at what age did you because I know you started out early with the kind of professional career on that. Where did that jump into, or when was that, in the 70s or?
Right, so I started doing Super 8 movies in junior high school. In fact, Huey, the local teacher, was my
Huey.
was my first
teacher.
I was probably 14, and I started doing these little films. I actually took my toy soldiers on a beach and did this huge animation with them, and we'd take for soundtrack. I had like a turntable, a cassette, a microphone, and live mix stuff. And it was pretty rough, but cutting the little film and trying to do stuff, and you learn by doing it. But it was just fun to try to figure things out. So I spent a few years doing that. I actually did some interning at Channel 6. My dad had picked up a 60mm Bolex camera along the way, and they were actually shooting film up until 1981. In fact, Channel 6 was the last station in the country to stop shooting movie film for the news because they'd all switched to video. And so they would actually process the film in the basement. And so the film had to be in, I think, by 3 o'clock, if not 2 o'clock, to get the film ready for 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Now, the old term was, film at 11, right? Film at 11,
That's
right?
crazy, right?
Because most stations had to send the film out to get it processed and get it back.
Right.
Channel 13 and Channel 8 would have a courier every day at noon ready to run to Boston to transfer the film and get it back, and then they'd get the film on the rewinds and cut it so they'd have it ready for 11 o'clock news.
Wow.
Channel 6 processed the film, could shoot later, had color. Their big deal was color. These other stations mostly had black and white.
Still black and white.
Color film, proud as a peacock, all the colors.
Right.
They would have the film ready and on 6 o'clock news. So that was their big advantage. However, as I saw, sometimes the processor would break down. They would lose all the film for the day, would be gone. And so they'd have the anchor would be,
telling you about it.
Telling you about it. Yeah, no sound, nothing.
Right.
Done,
That is...
The thing about film is, we're shooting 60mm film, is that the sound is 16 frames, or is it 18 frames? Maybe it's 18 frames. 16 or 18 frames, I think it's 16 actually. 16 frames away from the picture. So if you're cutting on sound, well, the sound is here, the picture's here, but there's still a beat where if the person goes to, let's say, pick their nose or something like that, you're going to see it because you're cutting on sound. So it's again, strange little things. But the one cool image I loved watching was all of these news reporters sitting there with their rewinds in a big room, all cutting their film all at the same time, with scissors and tape and just literally assembling it. And then, of course, they put it on the reels. And then when they would go to run the news, they literally would run movie projectors when they hit the button to run the film. It would be literally live from film directly out into the air and cutting back. So, it had that kind of, it was just, again, very organic, very interesting. And I was just lucky enough to kind of see that transition. Now, I started working at Channel 6 when I was probably 17 as a studio cameraman. Went from being a stringer, but I ended up getting fired for not only being late half the time, but also I was sneaking upstairs because when they started making the transition to video, it was like do not touch this or 3/4 inch old video equipment. But I was working on my little Super 8 black and white movies and sneaking up and transferring the films to video. And I eventually got caught and got in trouble. I actually had one director that was helping me do it, but then somebody else found out that I was teaching myself how to edit video of my little Super 8 horror movies, blah, 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 blah. But,
adding those to video.
Yeah.
Well, and it's an interesting time because that's when you say film at 11. I think it's kind of funny because it could be like film at 11 and then it's like there's a cat in a tree or something because it's local news.
Yeah.
But it was wild that it was, so it was literally because I think a lot of the viewers, they're always wondering, okay, well, so at that point, literally they have to send away, get the film and it had to be developed and then they'd clip
Yeah.
it themselves.
Oh yeah,
and,
yeah.
yeah.
Again, scissors and tape, but literally there used to be teams of people who, well, a couple anyway, that would run the film every day, and also Bangor had the same thing. When Bangor wanted to shoot film, they would have to send that film all the way
To
to
Boston, yeah.
and to get it back, and that was the thing that was going on all the time.
And it was probably, a lot of the older folks that were there might have been, it's like, this was what they were used to. It wasn't
Yeah.
like they weren't going to be running out the door to get
Right.
the first video camera. And that was started to break in the 80s. So you find that you're kind of a little bit, a bit
Foot
between
in both
two
worlds.
Yeah,
Foot in
both worlds.
And once I get out of high school at 18, I get a job as a news photographer at Channel 8. I got my own news card, 18 years old, and that was just a blast. You know what I mean? I, of course, I'm like showing off to my friends, 18-year-old, bombing around in a Channel 8 news car, and the cameras were so bad. I mean, these are single tube cameras. You have to take a penny to move this little dial in order to get the color balance right. If the camera lens was open while you're traveling, if let's say there was a reflection off the tripod from the sun, it would literally burn the tube of the camera, and the camera would have this lightning bolt through it. You'd have to sort of burn off the entire image. They'd open the camera. The engineer, when I get back to the studio, would have to shine the camera onto a white card, burn everything off, and start fresh. And it happened all the time.
And that was early video?
And that was, yeah, it was
Okay,
1980.
yeah. 80s,
We're talking 80, 81.
And you'd see
I
that on a
graduated
lot of,
82, so it was 82 or
the
so.
early
83.
videos you would see, because there was a documentarian that I like, John Alpert. He had a kind of like a street documentary with the early video, because I had a video camera like that. In the 80s,
Yeah.
you walked around,
Right.
but it flared out a lot.
Yeah,
it was always
it was just
burned out.
right.
It didn't have a great white balance.
Exactly. I mean, so I ended up getting in a lot of trouble because I ended up getting speeding tickets with I was actually in the newspaper, a Channel 8 car loaded with kids speeding past
Speeding
Deering
around
Oaks.
town, right?
News director was not happy with me because I didn't drink, thank God. But I mean, literally, it was just like, hey, I got this news car, and I'm like, all that shit.
Have the fun with
Yeah,
it, right?
but so I've just been kind of dabbling and diving in and having fun, making plenty of mistakes. In fact, Huey ended up making this documentary of this great old movie star named Grace DeCarlton Ross. She was in silent movies, but I had shot an interview with her when I was 15 over to public access, but didn't realize the sound wasn't plugged in. And then years later, about 3 or 4 years later, Huey makes a film about her. So I was trying to do these documentaries back in the day, but you got to learn to make every mistake possible, so hopefully you learn. Not that you want to make mistakes, but those are the things that happen.
And
So just in the process of doing, you make enough mistakes. Hopefully, eventually, you figure out how not to make those mistakes.
And you stayed here local, and you were working with local wrestling. You've been doing infomercials. You kind of did a ton of different things throughout the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
And then,
Well, I mean, it's hard to, I love Portland and I love being here. My family's here. No question I would have made a lot more money and had greater success, as far as I'm concerned, if I had moved to California or New York or whatever. But I just enjoyed being here. And so, I think that a lot of times you do things as a means to an end. You like, well, okay, I'll shoot these commercials or these infomercials or these wrestling shows or whatever. And you think, okay, that's just kind of, gets me to something else. But at some point you go, well, that's what I do, And so I think every decade there's probably, like, I'm doing completely different kinds of things than I was previously for whatever reason,
Right.
Lately it's been documentary work, 2000-ish, thereabouts. I'm doing hundreds of infomercials. Before that, it's, I don't know, toy commercials. I was doing I get a Nickelodeon thing I was doing for a while. Did a lot of toy commercials. But along the way, you're doing whatever comes along just to make a living, try to support a family.
well, I think that's part of, you didn't want to be kind of the small cog in the wheel somewhere else. So you kind of made your own territory here, which means, kind of just coming up with it and mixing and matching and things. And more recently, you've been doing, because I had seen this before at Aura, when you had a kind of a world premiere. It was about a year and a half ago. Was it the first season? It was kind of the ride along series. And this, I think, had a lot to do with the addiction crisis in Maine. And I think that's something that's really salient to people. They'd want to learn more about. So I thought you could tell us a little bit more
Sure.
about that show.
Yeah, so we probably trying to think, it's 2023. So about 2021 started a series called Voices of Hope, and it is basically at this point a 10 1-hour program that deals with addiction in Maine, but the show tries to look at the science of addiction in addition to understanding how people have gone into it and how they've come out of it. The goal being that we're hoping that certainly people can learn from it who are suffering from it, but ultimately how family members and people who are just looking at this, not understanding it, can have more empathy and sort of maybe give a little bit more perspective on what's going on, and so that might lead to some solutions, some answers. Our show is called Voices of Hope because at the end of the show, at every program, we end up something very hopeful. So if we're looking at an episode that deals with a lot of loss, we end up in a program where we look at, well, here's somebody who made their way out of it, or here's how somebody's dealing with their pain in a very positive way, trying to make a difference. So we started the series as actually, I think we did 12 half-hour shows, and then eventually we ran them on all the CBS stations in Maine, and now we're coming up on the 10th 1-hour show that's running on Maine Public Broadcasting. We ran eight episodes in this, I think this early winter spring. We're going to run those 8 again, plus 2 additional episodes. The one episode we're just finishing up is on veterans who are struggling, various aspects of struggling, but basically just looking at that and what's out there to help them. And then the next episode that we're doing is on sex trafficking, which we did previously a half-hour on, now expanding into a 1-hour show.
1 hour.
So like this Friday, I'm going to be filming and writing with the South Portland Police Department, as we're going to be just looking at what's going on in that situation. And they're just a microcosm of a much greater problem. So we're just going to, just kind of see what happens.
Well, let's take a look at a clip from some of that as well, and then we'll come right back after that. We'll talk some more about it, kind of where else things are going in the future. So We'll be right back.
In September of 2018, we realized that our son was suffering with alcohol use disorder. And we want to share what we've learned with other folks in hopes that their loved one may be assisted as they pursue recovery.
I wanted to understand the science. I wanted to understand what happens emotionally, what happens spiritually. Eventually, I met Reggie, and we started interviewing many, many people who truly understood addiction, people who had severe addiction. They got it, and they were in recovery, and they told us their stories.
I've been a video and film producer in Maine for the last 40 years, and nothing has been more important to work on than this TV series. It's really an honor to be part of it, and I'm looking forward to the impact.
And what this series represents to me is the possibility of the happy ending. And the people who have been so courageous, the young people who have shared their stories of resiliency and sharing their personal way out of addiction, I'm hoping that will have a ripple effect.
This documentary series is really what storytelling is about. It's about connecting with other people who are going through hardship and helping them tell their story. And it's been really moving, and it's been a really spiritual experience.
These are topics that are really challenging for adults and for teens, for children to talk about, and to be able to hear others' stories and to be able to share and process different experiences, and to know that in a way so much of this is a normal part of life and that needs to be taken out of the shadows.
So showing segments of Voices of Hope has really helped students really see factual, real stories from real Mainers that are relatable, personal, and it makes it okay to talk about mental health issues, substance use disorder, and these issues that a lot of our kids are struggling with, either themselves or their friends or their families, and gives them an idea of how to talk about it, where to get help, and that help is possible and that recovery is possible.
Just by its nature, I think it creates some feelings in you that make you wonder about these issues and these stories and these people. And just by starting that process, I think it takes you somewhere. Because we all have these experiences in our lives where none of us are immune, either to addiction or mental illness or any of the kinds of issues that plague us in this culture. I think it gives people an insight and a window into how do we deal with these issues.
Hey, we're back. So that was Life on the Street. And that's a particular thing. Is that kind of where you do a lot of the ride-alongs, right? And you go out with a lot of folks?
Right. So it doesn't happen as much as we want. In fact, one of the problems we had initially doing the show was that it's in the middle of COVID. So we're really limited on B-roll. We did a lot of the interviews and so forth, just in fact in this particular room, trying to keep some distance, but keep people safe and comfortable. At the end of the day, we just couldn't go out into the world. And so we would try to make it work the best we could. Still, we ended up with some powerful material, and it has led to a lot of great things. In the course of the Life of the Streets, that was really looking at what's just some perspectives from both the police department and all the other organizations that are helping a lot of the homeless people on the streets, what to give a sense of what's going on, how they're being helped. Now it's really exploded even in a greater way since I shot that episode. I mean, you see what's going on with the homeless encampments under the bridge and so forth, and their struggles now that winter's about to hit hard. I mean, your heart goes out to people who are just out there struggling and suffering with no real solutions in sight. But in the course of this particular episode that we shot, it was interesting because you got to see what the different, how the police were doing in terms of trying to be helpful, the burnout factor from the police officers, looking at the medical team from the fire department that's going down, checking on diabetes, checking on wounds, trying to just to they're picking up needles constantly, just trying to keep people alive. Right. And then you've got groups like Milestone and Preble Street that are just trying to give food and water and give some sort of comfort to people who are really struggling. So there are a lot of people out there trying to do things, but at the end of the day, people in their addiction are gonna, until they're willing to really try to make a difference, try to make a change, they're just stuck where they are, because again, unless people really want change, it's just not going to happen no matter what you do.
Well, and that's what I thought would be interesting to talk about, was because I had seen that in the episodes and the experience that I've gathered through, because you're more of a fly on the wall. You're not putting yourself in there as much from what I remember for a lot of shows. No. You're just kind of watching, as they do the talking, whoever they might be. But a lot of the time, I mean, that's what it does seem to me as though this is the definition of rock bottom. Yeah. Because when you're in drugs or alcohol, which is a drug as well, at the rock bottom, you've lost your friends, you lost your family, you lost your money, your house, and all that. And that's where you're kind of stuck at. Yeah. And I don't know that there's any solution that doesn't include convincing the folks themselves that they need to do something different in their lives. Yeah. And that's something that I've noticed, because I just think that it's we've all struggled at times, and it's a catch-22. It's something I don't know if we're ever going to really be able to figure out, because building shelters, if they don't want to go to it, isn't going to necessarily work. Yeah. Because if you can't use drugs in the shelter, then you might not want to go to the shelter. Right. And that becomes the big issue.
You have such, you've got a lot of other dynamics going on too. You've got, people's self-esteem is so low, right, that they just want to sort of disappear. Right. And they're chasing that high. Right. That at the end of the day, they feel they don't care if they die. They're like, right, they just want that initial high that they had, and they're chasing that. And now with Narcan, they're saying to their their drug buddy, hey, if I go, Narcan may bring me back.
Right, exactly.
Which they'll do, but then an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours later, they might do it again, and their buddy's not there, and they're going to die. Thank God Narcan's keeping people alive. The cops are and the fire department's constantly showing up and Narcaning, but in some cases it might be 3, 4, 5, 6 times of Narcan to get one person back. So it's frightening as heck.
Because you can also build a tolerance to Narcan, I'm sure, and so it doesn't
which I don't
have
know.
the same effect.
Yeah.
I'm guessing too, but I mean, I think that part of I agree with you, is that the brain chemistry gets to a point where you are at a point where you feel like there's nothing to lose, because you've gotten so addicted to it. I mean, I think there's got to be solutions, but you can find out a lot on these shows because a lot of these folks know they're experts on maybe methadone clinics or things like that.
Well, and we do end in a hopeful note.
Hopeful note on every episode. Yeah.
The episode on Life in the Streets, we have this gentleman named Bob Bergeron, who was on the street for 10 years. And he's an artist, and now he's just living life, without addiction, painting and doing his thing. But he would be the person that you would thought, again, be one of those people on the street that's just going to stay there.
Right.
And there are those people who do finally get to that point where they're like, no, they just don't want to live like that.
Right.
And one of the hard things and things that I learn a lot on this, because I didn't start off doing this thing with any sort of preset knowledge about how things are. I've learned as I've gone forward. But one of the things that happens, I've found, is that people just do not see life being any better. They cannot imagine their lives being better without their drugs or their drink. They just can't picture themselves in a being happy at all.
Right.
Like, they think without it, it's just going to be the most miserable existence. But in talking to people who are on the other side of it, they can't believe how good their lives are.
Right.
And what's interesting, a lot of them say that they wouldn't have changed anything. I mean, they may regret stealing their grandmother's dying cancer medication, her pain meds. They regret that. They regret hurting their parents, for sure. They regret hurting their children. But in terms of their own struggle, oftentimes, when they're on the other side, when they're spending time helping other people and living life the way that they're living, they're like, they wouldn't change it, which is amazing, because they've gone through such hell. And you look at the mugshots of some of these people who are like incredible now, and you're looking at them missing teeth and the pockmarks and all the stuff, just looking like hell. And now you can't even believe they're the same person, because they've pulled it together. And that's what's incredible about witnessing and talking and exploring this. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot more empathy.
Right.
And I've learned a lot. I've given much more understanding than I'm trying not to. You try not to be judgmental.
Right.
We're all human, but
Right.
you learn as you go.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the big part of it is that you understand that it's everybody's a person, and they put themselves into a difficult situation that's hard to pull out of. And we are all trying to figure it out as a group, as a city together. And it's a difficult situation.
Right.
And what about with sex trafficking? That's pretty heavy.
Right.
How does that follow up?
Well,
on that?
we've interviewed some women who've really gone through the hell on earth. And, it's horrifying. It's sad. Again, women that are now helping other women. I mean, the situation with the police officers, we're going to be just, you look at the hotels, well, one of the things that's going on now is that prostitutes can't be charged. So it's no longer illegal for them in the sense that they can at least be prosecuted. Now the Johns can and the pimps can. So it's a different dynamic. And so when it comes to a prostitute talking to a cop, she doesn't have to. She doesn't have to necessarily.
And that's in Maine.
That's in Maine.
Yeah.
That the law changed.
Well,
so that's just another factor of what's going on.
All these dynamics, right?
You have this push to Lewiston. Portland's become sort of so gentrified that you can look at wherever poverty is, you're going to find prostitution.
Right, where people are desperate.
Right. And there's the area called the Tree Streets where there's just a lot of bad stuff going on. And so, it's just a very sad situation.
And that also, a lot of times drugs are involved in that as well, because you're feeding an addiction.
And that's what our show is about, drug and alcohol addiction. Sex trafficking is definitely connected.
And so it's a lot of these shows, they're a mixture of having the persons involved, meaning a lot of times the police and sitting and talking about things, but also there's a lot of that being right out there.
Yeah.
And then part of that, growing up and having a black belt or doing a lot of is that what informed you? Because you're the cameraman on these things yourself most of the time, I assume, right?
Yeah. No, I shoot all of the material.
You shoot all of it. And so do you?
In some cases, I'm interviewing people, and others, sometimes I'll have Dave, the executive producer, sit in, or Cindy Valente, another producer, will do interviews. Even Tori Ryden has done quite a few. But often, in terms of the show, I'm interviewing people, and I'm doing all the actual shooting and all of the filming. It's challenging.
You don't mind getting in there, getting your hands dirty, and being out there.
That's fine. I'm not. I mean, you have to be careful. I've had stuff thrown at me, and
or if there's needles around, you got to be careful of that too.
It's hard, and even looking at this homeless encampment situation, I'm really. I'd like to get footage of what's going on and try to avoid faces and so forth, but it's tricky, because again, you're dealing with people who don't want to be seen.
They don't want to be filmed.
They don't want to have facial recognition going on from technology. There's a lot of dynamics going on, but I do need to get coverage of that. I've shot some, and it's just a very sad situation. But again, you got to be delicate, and you got to, from a legal standpoint, and as well as from a standpoint of just being respectful, try to balance all that stuff out.
And there's always hope at the end of every episode. And so it's not a sense of like just looking in without wanting to find, what's a solution, or talking to people who are really out there figuring it out. Where can people out there watch these episodes, or what's the best way? Is there also social media to get in touch with you to see more about this?
Well, if you go to seedmain.org, you can actually watch the episodes.
Okay.
And that's SEED.
SEE.
And then MAINE.org.
Okay.
So you can actually watch all of these episodes that are running. It'll be running on Maine Public Television, I think starting mid January, and then we're gonna on January 10th. We're gonna have the veterans episode at Aura. We're gonna have basically a preview of that. Anybody's welcome to come and watch that 1 hour show.
And I watched that episode, a couple of those the other year at Aura. Right. You had some of the first segments.
Yeah.
So
they've been kind enough. Aura's been spectacular.
They've been great about it.
Very kind to provide the space with no charge, just to help us out, because they realize what they're just doing whatever they can do to help.
And can the folks out there find you on Facebook or Instagram, and maybe they could find out more if they
Voices of Hope.
Voices of Hope.
Yeah, we do have a YouTube and a Facebook and so forth.
Okay.
Instagram, but so we have a very small team trying to do all of those, carry all those.
But doing a good thing in the process. And so watch for those coming up on PBS, you said in January?
Yeah, starting in January.
Late,
probably mid to late. I don't know if we have a start date yet, but it's, we'll be running the 10 episodes. Right. And I think they're going to, they are, at the end of the day, the real hope is that we can make a difference with young people. And so one of the big things that we've really shifted in our whole effort is to break these down into small pieces and then to work on getting curriculum into schools. So we've really seen some remarkable reactions from students. We've done a lot of surveys before and afterwards, dealing with specifically the dangers of high potency marijuana. We did 2 1-hour shows on that. Two individuals who were featured on our show have been now going and giving forums at school, showing pieces of our film, but basically getting into talking to students about, it's not about saying no, it's just, here's information, here's what's going on, here are facts, do whatever you need to do, as kids are going to do what they're going to do, but here's what you need to know. And so they're really blowing kids away with a lot of this information.
And watching these, I've noticed that it's very unbiased. It's very much about just the matter of fact. But again, I agree with you. If you can find people before they get themselves into the pickle or, into the quicksand, then it's easier for them to kind of say, okay, I'll zig when I need to zag.
Yeah.
So it's great on all of those different fronts. But I want to thank you so much, Reggie. Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah. I know you got things to do. So
that's all good.
But we'll be right back right after this. Thanks again.
All right.